I'd like to introduce Chris Green from Manga High, and he is going to be presenting, after which we will have a break. Thank you.
I'm here to talk about the power of adaptive and blended learning. But the first thing I want to do is to try to convince you that it's worth listening to me for maybe 25 minutes. So, first of all, what's my experience? Well, I work for Manga High, but I'm not here to talk about our product or to advocate our product. I hope what I talk about will apply to many different products that you might look at out there in the marketplace. So let me talk about my experience first. Hopefully I can convince you that I have enough experience to share with you what I've learned. Well, I've taught for 15 years mathematics, secondary, not primary, and I've taught in the UK. So I spent 15 years as a maths teacher. Most of that was moaning about the lack of good digital resources. I spent 2 years doing supply teaching, which was a real eye-opener. Having established myself well at the school I was working at, knew the kids, knew the staff, I then tried or left teaching for 2 years, worked in some really difficult and challenging places, over 100 different schools in my 2 years of supply teaching. I spent some time working for OUP, writing some teacher resources, and then I left teaching, and for the last 10 years I've been working at Manga High, creating digital maths games and resources. But the best part of my job is I get to go into schools pretty much every week and teach maths classes and get maths teachers to watch and observe how I teach with digital learning. And I've done that in all different countries across the world. And that's my favourite part, because I actually still miss being a teacher. It's been 10 years. I miss getting to know kids, and I guess miss going on that journey with them. But what it has given me is a unique, I think, quite a unique insight into different curriculums around the world and what works and what doesn't work, in my experience, in digital learning. And all I'm here to do today is to share what I've learnt in those 10 years. So, these are 2 failures that I see of a mathematics lesson. If any of your students get less than 50% of their work correct, I think that's a failure. And there's no defense to turn around and say, well, it's on the curriculum, that's there for them to do. We would have failed as a maths teacher if that student gets less than 50%, if you've given them the work to do. You've got students who are fed up, or angry, or even worse, really upset. So there's no defense for that. Students have to be given work that they can at least achieve more than half of the correct answers. Here's a second failure of a mathematics lesson. Many students think this is the objective. 100% is the objective. You ask a student, what are you trying to get out of this lesson? Well, I want everything right. But what do you end up with? Well, yeah, sure, you'll end up with some happy kids, but you might equally end up with some pretty bored students. So for me, these are 2 failures of a mathematics lesson. What do we want? Well, the solution is differentiation, of course. Every student getting between 70 and 90% of what they do correct, something like this, at the edge of their comfort zone. And traditionally, we achieve this by setting different work to different students. And if you want to set 30 different worksheets to 30 different students, then good luck to you across all the different classes you teach for the next 39 weeks of the school year. This is what I was taught to do as a trainee teacher, and within a few weeks I realised it was, well, impossible. There is, of course, a digital approach to this, which is adaptive learning. It's nothing you won't have heard of before. Of course, you're trying to move the students between easy and medium questions and medium and hard questions if they're ready for them. So if you're using a digital program, it should be adapting to the level of the student's understanding so everyone gets to the edge of their comfort zone. So here's a question for you, to get you to the edge of your comfort zone. I would have given you 5 minutes, but we were a little bit delayed, so I'll give you maybe 2.5 minutes or so. And the question, you've got your pencil and paper there, maybe discuss with the people on your table. I'm simply asking for how many squares can you see? And so that there is no confusion, the vertices of your squares must lie on the vertices of that grid that you can see there. So you have 2 minutes or so to calculate. Please, off you go. You're maths teachers. Here's a question you can try. And if anyone gets the right answer, I'll be terribly impressed. Give you a couple of minutes. Discuss with the people on your table, as you would do with a class. Make sure you all agree. Anyone who thinks they have an answer already, please raise your hand. Are you raising your hand, sir? At the back? Could you show me how many you think by doing this? 10, 20? How many you think? 30. 30, you think about there. 30? Okay. All right, a lot of people saying 30. Of course, many students will say 16 and then very quickly say 17 and then say 21 or 22. Some will, of course, spot these 16. Then there's 9 more of these and 4 of these and one big one, making 30. But, of course, some of you were thinking of these ones. Or possibly these ones. So what I hope is that you've just been taken to the edge of your comfort zone. And that is what I think we should be doing with all our learning. I won't give you the correct answer. You can work it out on your own. Of course, as a good teacher, I'm not here to provide answers. I'm here to provide opportunities for you to learn. So the next thing is a very personal story. Independent learning. Why should a student be held back from learning as much as they like independently? Now, on the left, you'll see me, age 9 years old. On the right, you'll see my school maths book, or an example of what my school maths book would have looked like. You write the answers inside the book. Now, one Friday, at the end of the week, I took my book home. I spent the entire weekend filling in all the answers without permission, because I quite like maths. I wasn't good at maths, but I enjoyed it. I got back to school on Monday, and this is what I expected. I was looking forward to receiving praise for all the hard, independent work I'd done. What happened? A slightly different reaction. And that memory has stuck with me for about 40 years. It was the worst experience for me as a child, secondary or primary. So why should anybody be prevented from doing some extra work if they want to? Clearly, I'd ruined my teacher's plan. I was the problem child now in the class because I'd done all the work. So what's the solution? Well, all students should have the freedom to do as much independent work as they want, clearly. And if it's digital, well, then you're not doing all the extra marking, clearly. The students are getting instant feedback. They're not having to write it, wait for you to mark it, give it back. They're getting instant feedback the second they've done the work. You, of course, will get feedback on how much they've done, and you can create a reward system around that. Who's done the most independent work this week, this month, and encourage that independent learning. And, of course, if you're using something that adopts AI, then if the student is doing or trying counting in 8 times tables and they're struggling, then they're being recommended 4 times tables, or counting in 4s if they're struggling. So if they're learning independently, we're letting AI do some work to help and support them as well. Now let's talk about homework for a moment. Why should you even consider a digital activity for homework? Well, of course, the first point I think is very obvious. Second point I think is, I've made that point already. You can, of course, look for long-term trends in your homework if it's getting marked digitally for you. And you're giving them another medium to do their homework. It's not just another worksheet. And of course, they're getting help as well, because hints and solutions are generally built into these kinds of resources. So my suggestion, let's take typically, if we balance perhaps primary and secondary, you might set 10 homeworks in a month. And perhaps your traditional approach might be setting 10 paper-based homeworks. That was certainly my normal approach to setting homeworks. So what might a digital approach or a digital or blended approach look like? It doesn't mean throwing away your work schemes of work or your textbooks or your worksheets. You're probably still setting the majority of your homeworks as a written homework. In most cases, your students are still sitting a written examination at the end of the year or the end of their school life. But why not include a couple of digital homeworks and then perhaps one investigation? Then you've got a reasonably good balance. The students don't always expect the same style of homework again and again and again. Some people talk about access. Now, in my very first exploration using a digital product, when I went into a school for a couple of weeks, the teacher said to me, "These students do not do homework." This was a school out in the west of London, a very deprived school in London. The students didn't do homework. The teacher said you'll get 1 or 2 out of 30. So I spent a couple of weeks at the school, and I found she was exactly right. I set homeworks, digital homeworks, no one did them. Why? They don't want to do homework. What were their reasons? I couldn't log in. My password didn't work. I didn't have internet connectivity. I couldn't get a device. All the excuses you could think of. So I thought about this. And so what I did the next time I gave them 2 homeworks. I gave them a worksheet and I gave them the digital homework. It was an option. I said, do whichever one you like. They had no excuse not to do it then. Everyone has a pen or pencil. Suddenly, the number of homeworks that were done digitally went up. Seemed an easy solution. Not every student, of course, and some have genuinely don't have access to a device, but it certainly increased the number of students who did their homework. Now, how do you introduce a brand new topic to your class? Well, this was my normal approach. I'll talk to you. I'll write stuff on the board for you. You can all listen and write it down. We'll take 5 or 10 minutes, and then you're ready to do the activity. So, here we go. What about a digital approach to it? I'll use the projector to play through some questions that are prepared. I haven't got to write them all down. I'll let the students try them. We'll discuss them as we go, and we'll still spend 5 or 10 minutes. So, in my traditional approach, I'll give you the formula for the area of a triangle. I'll give you a worked example. You write it down in your book very, very carefully, and then you can practice 10 of these, and then you'll all understand how to work out the area of a right-angled triangle. Great. If I happen to give you something that's not right-angled, you're really going to be messed up. If it's more of a digital approach, I'm going to play through some questions with you, and we'll discuss them as we go. My first question is not the area of a right-angled triangle. My first question is, how many squares? Just how many squares? I'm not talking about area at all. We'll get on to that. Then I might talk about what's the area of this rectangle and why is the triangle half of this? And then we're ready to move on to some more things. It takes the same amount of time, but if I've got the digital technology there and it's providing the questions for me, I can achieve so much more, and it becomes a discussion with the class rather than, here's my presentation, write it all down, now get on with it. So I think the most important slide I'm about to show is probably this next one. This is what I would refer to as an ordinary digital lesson. Now, I've set this up imagining a 60-minute example. Obviously, you can adapt this to your length of your classes. And there's a digital and non-digital approach to this. The worst thing I think you can do in a 60-minute lesson is everyone's on the computer for 60 minutes. I have seen this. Many schools I've visited, they have the computer room and the teacher says, I don't get in here very often. Everyone has to do as much work as possible. And it's a disaster. So I would suggest begin with your teacher explanation. It doesn't have to be digital. It's 5 or 10 minutes. It's your explanation. Then instead of simply setting a textbook exercise, set a couple of digital activities, one that's accessible to everyone and one that's an extension activity. No more than 12 to 15 minutes. Then stop. Let's discuss what we've learned. What's the key vocabulary? What were the difficult questions that you came across? Then we're back on to continuing with the activity. You can use the instant data you're creating to see who's struggling and who needs some extension activities. Only 12 to 15 minutes, and don't push it up to the end of the lesson. Give yourself 10 minutes at the end where you write on the board, question 1, easy question. Question 2, a hard question. Question 3, an impossible question. Pencil and paper out. You've got 10 minutes. Please try these 3 questions. So in 60 minutes, they're only on the computer for 30 minutes. The rest of the time, they're listening to your instruction, they're discussing, they're working on problems in pencil and paper. And most importantly, you are moving round the class, watching what they're doing, answering their questions, engaging with them. You're not sitting back at your desk catching up with your reports, which really need doing by the end of the day, unfortunately. Because if you are sitting down, then you're not getting the most out of the activity. Digital learning is not about making your life easy. You're all hard-working teachers. Digital learning just allows you to work just as hard, but just potentially achieve a little more with a different type of resource. So it is not there as a babysitter. It doesn't work. Any product is no better, in my opinion, than a good textbook if it's not used properly. And it's the teacher that's the most valuable resource in the room, and it's the teacher that has to be busy and moving around the class and watching what's happening. Why haven't you started? Why do you think it's that answer? How did you get that right? Could you help this student because they're struggling? I'll be back in 2 minutes. Now, if you're really brave, you might use a flipped learning approach. And this does take a leap of faith. Set an activity that they've never done before and tell them you will not pass this activity. And some of them will go, oh, yes, I will. And maybe some of them will. But don't make that expectation. Give them 12 to 15 minutes. Let them try a digital activity. And let them fail at that activity. Or rather, let them not pass it. What will happen? They'll have questions for you. And so you've got a period of maybe 10 minutes or so where you can discuss the activity. What do you want me to teach you so you can pass it? And there's a pull from the students rather than a push from the information from you. So it's okay to start with something and it's okay to make mistakes. Then after this help and discussion, you may even play through some activities with them. Then they can have their main session where they try the activity. Again, no more than 12 to 15 minutes. You probably only need one activity during this time, maybe a second one for the most able students. And then give yourself a good period of time at the end of the lesson to try a practical problem. If you've been working on, let's say, surface area during this lesson, at the end you tell them, well, here is a large building with lots of windows. We need to clean all of them. Here is the area of one window. Here's what we're going to pay. How much is it going to cost us? Some practical problem that uses the work you've been doing. And they can do that on paper. So again, 60-minute lesson, only half an hour of that are they spending. And even that's in 2 separate time periods. Crucially, you're busy, up on your feet. You're not sitting down. You're moving around the class. Now, in my experience, 10 to 15 minutes or age plus or minus 2 minutes is a good measure for getting good practice, particularly if you're busy and engaged around the class. When you start to push it to 20, 30, 45 minutes, the concentration is lagging off. So if you're going to push any further than 15 minutes, I think you really have to evaluate what's going on in your class. And when I've sat back and observed this, I've looked around and seen what work's going on. Yes, 1 or 2 students, very well motivated, carrying on. The majority, after half an hour, are not on task. But I think that's the same with a textbook or an exercise. If we're all going to do simultaneous equations, how are you going to feel after 35 minutes flat out? Or 45 minutes flat out? It's a long time. Revision. Well, when it comes to revision, this was my approach to revision. Here's your exam papers, here's your worksheets, here's your textbook exercises. Sorry, yes? Okay. Sorry. Volume down. Oh, time, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. So here's an approach to a traditional approach to revision. Why not set a slightly different approach or a combined approach? Set 1 or 2 activities to do each day. Not here's 5 exam papers, get them done over the next 2 weeks. But of course, the best thing is to use a part of each approach. I'm not advocating getting rid of your practices necessarily with revision. Flip learning at home. A traditional approach, ask them to learn all the material they need to before they come to the next lesson so they can practice it. That's tough. I've rarely seen this be successful, but there's no reason you shouldn't try it. With a digital approach, don't expect them to magically learn at home. Expect them to learn something about the vocabulary that they'll need and bring those questions to their next lesson. The best thing, use both approaches. Flip learning, there's a lot of talk about it. I hear a lot of teachers talking about it. I hear very few teachers telling me that they can do it successfully. But that's no reason we shouldn't be trying. So, 6 best practices for digital learning. First of all, I think I'm echoing what my colleague said a little bit earlier. If you're doing something 2, 3, or 4 times a month that's digital, then you're getting a good experience. You're getting good value out of it. Try setting homework, at least 1 homework a week, something digital. And of course, encourage independent learning between all your students, for all your students. Make sure students have another go and have another go. At least 3 goes at something before they turn around and say, you know what, I didn't get that, I need some help. So when I'm in a mathematics class helping students, I won't help them until they've had 3 goes at something. First go, well, that was confusing, I didn't get that. Second go, oh, I know a little bit more. Third go, maybe they've got it. If they haven't, then it's time for me to help and support them. But I won't help students until they've had at least 3 attempts on something. Don't set 50 activities or the whole year's work for them to do over the next 6 months. Treat a digital resource like you would any piece of work. Set 1 piece of work, maybe 2 and occasionally 3. Don't overburden students with 50 pieces of work to do, just because you can set it. And finally, final point here, as I said earlier, restrict the time 10, 15 minutes before you reflect. The last thing I think we're just about on time, is how to choose a digital resource. First of all, it should adapt, so it pushes every student to the edge of their comfort zone. It, of course, should engage your students. If your students are not engaged, they're not learning properly, and it should be simple to use. And there are a number of products out there that do all those things. If you have a trial, make sure you involve at least a couple of teachers and a couple of classes, give it at least a few weeks, and get feedback from not only your teachers, but from your students and your parents as well, if they've taken it home for homework. And perhaps most importantly of all, if you do decide to go with any digital resource or content, make sure you get training, not just in how to use it, but also how to teach with it. If you want a copy of the presentation or you have any more questions, please just drop me an email, chris.green@mangahigh.com. I'll be very happy to answer any questions for you. How's that for time? Perfect.